This video is to go over the Organizational Capacity Assessment, which is your first assignment for this course, and it will be due at the end of week 2 on Sunday. So this assignment is closely connected to your final proposal, ideally. You will choose an organization by the end of week 1. It's to your benefit to have one chosen as soon as possible, and you're going to be examining that organization to eventually seek new funding through the proposal assignment and expand its services through a grant. However, I do have students that by the end of week 2, they end up changing their mind and want to actually submit a proposal on a different organization. That is okay. It just adds a little bit more work. So I would encourage you to think about what organization you may want to focus on for the next 7 weeks. And let's talk if you do end up wanting to change your mind after submitting this assignment. So you can choose any organization that you would like. It should be one that you have a connection with. So either you are currently interning there, or you volunteered in the past or worked there in the past, and that you have a great interest in. And you're going to be focusing on that for your proposal. So if you plan on focusing on a very large organization, maybe an organization that has multiple divisions and or locations across the country, a large organization, for example, is a hospital, even a city agency, they may have many departments within that. You can focus on your overview of the large organization, so the history of it and the purpose of the organization. But when you get to the analysis, and we'll go through these different sections, you're going to want to choose a specific unit within the agency to focus on. It'll make it much easier for you to answer these questions. As far as your sources, so I am encouraging you to use online sources, of course, but you shouldn't just narrow yourself to just that. Please look at the organization's website. They may have annual reports. Those are obviously still online, but you can also interview your peers at the organization, staff, supervisors, even clients. But please, please, please make sure that you do not include names in your paper. So I've had that mistake happen, but you want to make sure that anyone that you speak to can remain anonymous. As far as format for this paper, so there are 4 sections of this paper, and I want you to use headings and subheadings for each component, and double space the entire paper when you turn it into me. You should not, this paper is not an outline, so you should be writing in complete sentences. And you don't necessarily need to include an introduction or conclusion, because that's built into the paper when you start to describe the organization. When you use data, and you should be looking at data to support, any evidence to support some of what you're writing, please make sure that you have references. They should be in-text citations, and then also adding the reference page at the end in APA format. You should address each question. So even if you don't know the answer to that question, for example, if the organization doesn't have a strategic plan, then you can write that. You can write that the organization currently does not have a strategic plan, or the last strategic plan that was posted was in 2010, for example. Do not skip the question. So I want to make sure that you have considered the question, looked for the information. If you end up having more than or several questions throughout your paper in each section where you're saying, I don't have this information, or the organization has not X, then that could be concerning. So it's something that we should have a conversation about, and you should email me about. So let's move on to the components of the paper. As I mentioned, there's 4 sections. The first is just describing the organization. So quite simply, the name of the organization, the mission, and the vision. The goals and objectives of the organization. So what are they trying to achieve in the community? Who are they serving? Is the organization a government entity? Is it a private organization? If it's private, is it nonprofit or a for-profit organization? And then is it faith-based at all? So you should be able to find all of that on the organization's website. And again, if you can't, that should maybe be a red flag. And then looking at whether or not the organization has a strategic plan, and that might give you a sense of what the organization's future goals are. And looking ahead 2, 3, 5 years, what are they trying to achieve? And you might want to describe that in a couple sentences. Once you describe the overview of the organization, and that is, if you're looking at a large organization, that is what you'd be describing. When you start to look at the structure and services, for those of you who have chosen a large organization, now you want to start looking and thinking about the specific unit when you get to some of these questions. So in existing structure and services, what is the history of this organization? I tend to find this part incredibly interesting. Some organizations are brand new and they've been around for less than 10 years, and others have been around since the 1800s or have a phenomenal history of evolving through various time periods. You also want to say a little bit more about the client population, the populations that the organization serves. You may have mentioned that in the description, but if you start to focus on the unit, your answer may be a little bit different than who the entire organization serves. Services and programs is something that you'd be describing in this section, as well as the administrative structure. So if you can find an org chart, that is great to be able to look at and see how is the organization organized by leaders and staff and units. And then quite simply, how many staff members work at the organization. You could have an organization that has less than 10 members, and it really kind of gives a picture into the capacity that the organization may have. The organization may also have over 100 staff members, or maybe they have 30 full-time members, but they have a massive volunteer effort. And so maybe a lot of the work is done through volunteers. So very interesting to kind of look at all of those components and describe them in this section. The next section is relationship to the environment. So, what gap or services, what role is this organization fulfilling in the community? Maybe it's a place where community members can come and use the computer and apply for jobs and get technical assistance around employment or benefits access. Maybe it's an educational focused organization, or maybe it's an organization that fills a need for senior citizens that need a cooling center, for example. Are there other organizations in the area which also provide similar services? So that's an interesting question, and it's something that you may not know until you start to look this up. Also looking at how far are these organizations from one another. So maybe there are a few organizations that are very similar, but if you live in a very large city or county, maybe they're spread by distance. And then you want to compare the similarities and differences that you observe in the demographic composition of the clients that are coming to this organization for services, as well as the staff. Do the staff reflect the people that they're serving? Do they hire from the community? Questions like that. And then lastly, for this section, is the organization collaborating with other organizations? And in the social service and human services field, partnerships are absolutely necessary. And so I think you'll find interesting answers for this one in regards to their levels of collaboration. And then lastly, the analysis of how the organization is functioning and how it's been adapting. And so this is the section where you will also highlight or kind of give shed some light to what the gaps might be in this organization. So you want to look at how the organization's programs are currently funded and list all of those funding sources. So that is one part of this paper where you can actually bullet and add a list, but you can also write it out in complete sentences. You want to try to assess to the best of your ability, and if you're familiar with this organization, it'll be easier, what are the primary strengths of this organization and their capacity to develop a new program. So, they might be able to serve more people, but does that also mean that as part of your grant, they would need to expand the number of staff because the current staff is completely at capacity with their clients? And then lastly, what are the current challenges that this organization is facing? That might be revealed to you through media. So if you look at social media, if you look at articles of the organization, maybe there are testimonies that have been given to local city councils or places where the organization has had an opportunity to advocate for their own funding. So that might give you a sense of the gaps or the challenges. And then just emailing one of the staff members, or if you work there, one of your peers, and talking about that question. You can certainly talk about many of these questions with any of the staff as well. So that's another wonderful way to get information for this assignment. And because of that, make sure that you give yourself enough time to do that. Another thing that I thought might be helpful is sharing with you an old student's paper. And I have taken out the name and blacked out the name of the organization and other identifying information, but I thought it's a way for you to really see the format. So everything is double spaced. They are using evidence and data to back up information, description of the agency and the organization. And then they have a title page, and of course at the end they have references, which are in APA format. This organization was able to provide an organizational chart, and so they added that in the appendix. So that should be helpful. This example is attached to my announcement, to the announcement section. And if you are unable to find it, please do let me know. It will also be uploaded in the week 2 module where it says example or sample organizational capacity assessment. All right, I think that is it. In regards to the grading of this assignment, it is 15% of your final grade. And each section is worth 10 points, which gives you 40 points for that. And then also the clarity of your writing, the grammar, making sure you're formatting it correctly with the use of headings and subheadings. And actually, I think that draft paper that you will be looking at has headings. It does not have subheadings. And then the proper use of APA format is another 10 points of your grade. A place where a lot of students lose points is in not proofreading your paper. So once you write it, step away for a little bit, give yourself a day or at least a few hours, and then come back to the paper and read it as if you are not the person who has written that paper. And that sometimes can be a useful exercise in catching some of those really minor errors, but it does matter for your final papers. And if you need an extension, please try to let me know 48 hours in advance by sending me an email. We'll talk about it. And as I said, we are going to be flexible this semester because of all that's going on with COVID and job loss and stress and anxiety and trauma. And so we want to work with you, but do try to get in touch with me in advance of the deadline. Good luck with writing this paper. I cannot wait to read it. These papers are wonderful, and I am here if you have questions.